My name is Vivian Clarke, and I am 62 years old. For 13 years I have lived with a silence that weighed heavier than any grief I have ever known. I have not hugged my grandchildren, not once seen them blow out candles on a birthday cake, not cheered for them at a school play. 13 years of being erased from their lives by choices I did not make, yet choices that cut me deeper than any wound could. People often say time heals all wounds, but time did not heal this. Time only deepened the ache, reminding me of everything I had lost. I used to imagine their voices, the way their laughter might echo in my kitchen, the way their footsteps might sound running down the hall. Instead, my house grew quieter each year, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. But this is not just a story about losing. It is not simply about a grandmother kept away. This is a story about patience, about planning, and about the quiet strength that grows when you refuse to let bitterness consume you. Because while I waited, I built something else. I built a life so solid that even those who tried to erase me could not deny my existence. And one day, I knew the chance would come to step back into my grandchildren's lives. When that chance arrived, I was no longer the same broken woman they tried to cast aside. I was stronger, wiser, and ready. This is my story. The fracture in my family began slowly, like a hairline crack in glass. At first it was barely noticeable. My son, Matthew, had always been close to me. After his father died, we leaned on each other like two weary travelers on a long road. We shared dinners, we talked about dreams, and when he met his future wife, Caroline, I welcomed her with open arms. At least I tried to. Caroline was charming in the way people can be when they want something. She was polished, graceful, and spoke with the kind of confidence that can win over any crowd. But behind the polite smiles, I noticed the subtle ways she pulled Matthew further from me. First, it was small things suggesting they spend holidays with her family instead of ours, dismissing traditions I had kept alive for decades. Then it grew sharper. Phone calls stopped being returned, visits became rare, excuses more frequent. The breaking point came after my husband's funeral. 3 days after we laid him to rest, Matthew called me with a voice I barely recognized. Cold, distant. He said Caroline thought it would be best if we took some space. Space, he called it, as though love needed walls. He said the children were confused and that too many people around them made it harder to process grief. I begged him to reconsider. They need stability, they need love, I told him. His reply still echoes in my ears. They have that, they have Caroline and me. From then on, the wall between us grew taller and thicker. Birthday cards I sent came back unopened. Christmas gifts were returned with notes saying not appropriate. Calls went unanswered. I lived less than an hour away, yet I may as well have been a stranger across the ocean. Each year stretched into another, and with every passing season, my grandchildren Ethan and Grace grew older without me. People asked me why I didn't fight harder, why I didn't go to court or demand visitation. But family is not a battle you win in a courtroom. I knew that any desperate move on my part would only push Matthew and Caroline further away, maybe even cause them to disappear completely. So I waited, and I planned, holding on to hope like a candle in the dark. When grief threatened to consume me, I realized I had two choices: let sorrow bury me, or build something strong enough to carry me forward. I chose the latter. I was 50 when my husband passed away, and instead of leaning into despair, I leaned into work. I had always loved design, textures, colors, the way fabric could tell a story. With nothing but determination and a small loan, I started a textile business out of my tiny apartment. I worked 18-hour days, sewing samples by hand, visiting factories, pitching to clients who barely gave me a second glance. People told me I was too old, too inexperienced, too broken to succeed. But each insult became fuel. Each closed door became a challenge I refused to let define me. Years passed, and my business grew beyond my wildest hopes. What began with bolts of fabric stacked in my living room expanded into showrooms, partnerships, and eventually a full-fledged company, Clarke Textiles. It wasn't just a business, it was proof that I could turn pain into power. By the time I was 60, Clarke Textiles had become an empire worth over $15 million. Yet money was never the end goal. It was a weapon, a language I knew Caroline understood better than love or loyalty. I kept building not only for financial freedom, but also to prepare for the day I could use that freedom to reclaim what was mine, my family. Every year on Ethan's and Grace's birthdays, I still bought gifts. I wrapped them carefully and placed them in a cedar trunk at the foot of my bed. Each one carried a note, a promise that someday I would give them myself. Every holiday, I wrote letters I never mailed, pouring my heart into words they might one day read. I collected newspaper clippings, school newsletters, any scrap of information I could find about their lives. My study became a shrine to 2 grandchildren I had not been allowed to love openly. When I finally sold Clarke Textiles to Hartwell Industries, I did so with a plan in mind. The deal was worth every penny I demanded, and with the money in hand, I bought a sprawling estate just miles from Matthew's home. 15 bedrooms, a grand library, an art studio, and gardens that stretched for acres. I designed it with Ethan and Grace in mind, a place that whispered welcome in every corner. It wasn't just a house, it was a declaration. A fortress built on resilience, ready for the day my grandchildren would finally walk through its doors. My empire was not only my survival, it was my preparation for war, fought not with weapons, but with patience, strategy, and love sharpened into power. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was in the library of my new home, sorting through boxes of old letters I had written to Ethan and Grace, when the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway made me look up. Through the window I saw a sleek black sub pulling up to the front steps. My heart raced, but not with fear. Somehow I knew who it was before she even stepped out. Caroline Bennett Clarke, my daughter-in-law, the woman who had stolen 13 years of my family from me. She emerged with the same polished grace she had always carried, though I noticed the edges were fraying. Her designer coat was impeccable, but her eyes told another story. They were tired, restless, almost desperate. She rang the bell and stood tall, but when I opened the door I saw her falter just slightly, as though the grandeur of the estate unsettled her. "Vivian," she said smoothly, her voice sugar-coated, "it's been a long time." 13 years, I answered, my tone calm but edged with steel. "What brings you here now?" She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning the marble floors, the chandelier, the walls lined with paintings. I watched envy flicker across her face like a shadow. She masked it quickly, plastering on a smile. "I thought, perhaps it's time we reconciled," she said. "The children are nearly grown. They should know their grandmother." Her words might have moved me once, but not now. I saw through them as easily as glass. "And what does reconciliation look like to you, Caroline?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Well, perhaps you could come live with us. It would make things easier. You'd be close to the children, we could support each other." I almost laughed. "Live with you? In Matthew's house?" "Yes," she replied quickly. "We'd been thinking of fixing up the pool house. You'd have your own space, of course." The pool house. She was offering me a place fit for a servant, not a grandmother. My silence stretched long enough to make her uncomfortable. Her eyes darted around again, taking in the wealth that surrounded her, and I understood. This wasn't about family, this was about money. "Tell me, Caroline," I said softly, "is it really the children you're worried about, or is it the bills piling up on your desk?" Her jaw tightened. For the first time, the polished mask slipped. "We've had some difficulties," she admitted, almost spitting the word. "Matthew's work isn't as stable as it once was. College is expensive. We thought, since you've done so well, that I would fund your life," I finished for her. The silence between us was louder than any thunder outside. She shifted uncomfortably, but I did not relent. "I won't be living in your pool house, Caroline," I said finally. "In fact, I've recently purchased this estate. 15 bedrooms. Perhaps you and Matthew would like to visit sometime. But understand this, if I re-enter my grandchildren's lives, it will be on my terms, not yours." Her smile froze. She left soon after, but not before I caught the look in her eyes. It wasn't reconciliation, it was fear. Fear that her carefully built wall was beginning to crack. After Caroline's visit, I knew the game had shifted. Her desperation confirmed what I had suspected for years. The power she held over Matthew and the children was built on fragile ground. All I needed was the right opening, the right move that could not be undone. That move came in the form of Westbridge Academy, the private school where Ethan and Grace studied. Prestigious, competitive, and always hungry for donors. I had followed its progress from a distance, cutting out articles and announcements that mentioned my grandchildren. When I learned the academy was launching a new mentorship and scholarship program for exceptional students, I knew this was the door I had been waiting for. I wrote a check so large the headmaster himself came to thank me, but my gift came with a condition. I wanted the program to include personalized mentorship for a select number of students. The school, thrilled by the idea, agreed without hesitation, and when it came time to select those students, I made sure Ethan Clarke and Grace Clarke were at the top of the list. It was a masterstroke. No one could accuse me of manipulation. I wasn't sneaking around or forcing myself into their lives. I was providing opportunities, building futures, and if those opportunities happened to bring me face to face with my grandchildren, then that was simply fate aligning in my favor. Still, this was more than strategy. It was love wrapped in patience. For 13 years I had been silenced, but through this program, my voice could finally reach them. I imagined walking through the doors of the academy, not as a stranger lurking on the sidelines, but as a mentor invited with honor. I imagined the moment Ethan and Grace would hear my name, not as a forbidden ghost, but as someone real, present, and unafraid. The battlefield had shifted. Caroline's walls were high, but I had found the gate, and this time I was stepping through. The library at Westbridge Academy smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where silence carried weight. I arrived early, dressed not in power but in warmth, a navy suit, a silk scarf, my grandmother's pearls. I wanted them to see me not as a distant figure of wealth but as someone steady, someone real. When the door opened, 2 figures stepped inside. Ethan was taller than I expected, lean with the sharp focus of someone used to carrying quiet burdens. Grace, smaller, carried her sketchbook close to her chest, her dark eyes cautious but curious. My heart stuttered at the sight of them. 13 years of birthdays missed, of milestones stolen, collapsed into this single moment. "Mrs. Clarke," Ethan said formally, his voice low, his posture careful. "Please call me Vivian," I replied gently, rising to greet them. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." We sat together at a table by the tall windows. Sunlight spilled across their faces, and I could see traces of Matthew's boyish grin in Ethan's jawline, and my late husband's thoughtful eyes in Grace's gaze. The resemblance was almost too much to bear. Dr. Whitman, the headmaster, had suggested I mentor students in entrepreneurship and creative fields. It gave me the perfect opening. "Ethan, I hear you're interested in renewable engineering projects," I began, pulling out a folder of notes. His eyes brightened despite himself. He spoke with passion, his hands sketching invisible diagrams in the air. He was brilliant, just like I'd always known he would be. "And you, Grace?" I turned to her. She hesitated, then whispered, "I write poems mostly." Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "I like writing about things people don't say out loud." The honesty of that nearly broke me. My granddaughter, raised on silence and control, had turned to words as her rebellion. "Then you and I have something in common," I said softly. "We both believe in truth." For 2 hours we spoke. They shared their dreams, their doubts, their hopes for college and beyond. Not once did I mention Caroline, not once did I remind them of the years stolen. This meeting wasn't about the past, it was about planting seeds for the future. As they gathered their things to leave, Grace paused. "Why haven't we met before now?" The question pierced the air like a blade. Ethan looked at me too, waiting. I steadied my breath. "Sometimes adults make choices that keep families apart," I said carefully. "But I am here now, and I hope we can choose each other moving forward." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the first step, and as they walked away, my heart carried something it hadn't in 13 years' hope. It didn't take long for Caroline to find out. I should have expected it. Control was her oxygen. The thought of losing even a fraction of it must have felt like drowning. A week after my first meeting with Ethan and Grace, I heard the sound of another car in my driveway. This time, there was no polite pretense. She stormed out of her SUV with the fury of someone who knew her grip was slipping. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she snapped the moment I opened the door. Her eyes burned with a mix of rage and fear. "Mentorship programs, scholarships, donations, do you think I don't see what you're doing?" I stayed calm, my voice measured. "What I'm doing, Caroline, is helping students. Ethan and Grace happen to be among them." "You're manipulating them," she shouted, stepping closer. "You're filling their heads with lies about how much you care. Where were you when they needed you?" Her words cut, but I refused to flinch. "I was there," I said quietly. "Every birthday, every holiday, I wrote to them. I sent gifts, letters, pieces of myself. You made sure they never saw them. Don't talk to me about absence, you built it." For a moment, silence fell heavy between us. Her face tightened, and I saw the crack in her armor. She knew I was right, but she wasn't the kind of woman who admitted defeat. "You think you can buy their love with money?" she sneered. "They don't need you, they have me." I let out a slow breath, then leaned in just enough for my words to land sharp. "They will choose for themselves, Caroline. That's what terrifies you. You're not afraid of me, you're afraid they'll see who you really are." Her eyes widened, panic flickering behind her rage. "Stay away from my family," she hissed, but her voice shook. "Family?" I repeated, my tone steady as a blade. "You've mistaken control for love, and control never lasts." Caroline's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She looked around the grand foyer, at the staircase, the chandelier, the quiet strength of the home I had built, and I knew what she was thinking, that she couldn't compete with the stability and dignity surrounding her. Not in this house, not in this life. She left without another word, slamming the door behind her, but the battle lines were drawn. For the first time in 13 years, she wasn't holding all the cards, she was scrambling, desperate. And I was finally ready to play. Caroline's next move was as predictable as it was desperate. A letter arrived one morning, stamped with the seal of the county courthouse. She had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I was harassing her family, manipulating her children, and causing emotional distress. It was exactly the kind of battle she thrived on: legal papers, intimidation, and control. But she had miscalculated. For the first time in years, I had both the strength and the evidence to fight back. The day of the hearing, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Caroline sat at one table, immaculate in a tailored suit, her lawyers flanking her like guards. Matthew sat beside her, shoulders slumped, eyes avoiding mine. I took my place at the opposite side, alone but unshaken. I didn't need an army. I had the truth. Caroline's lawyer painted me as a wealthy manipulator, a grandmother trying to buy affection. He spoke of gifts, donations, and calculated interference. When he was done, I stood, my hands steady on the table. "For 13 years, I began, my voice carrying through the room. I sent letters, cards, and gifts to my grandchildren. Every one of them returned unopened. I have them all here." I lifted a worn box and placed it before the judge. Dozens of envelopes, each one marked "return to sender," spilled across the table. Gasps rippled through the room. "And here," I continued, producing documents, "are the scholarships and funds established in their names quietly, without fanfare. I didn't seek to buy their love, I sought to preserve their future." The judge's eyes softened as he examined the evidence. Then came the moment I hadn't dared to hope for. The courtroom doors opened, and Ethan and Grace walked in. They requested to speak. Ethan's voice was steady, though his hands shook slightly. "We're not being manipulated. We're not confused. For the first time, we're being told the truth. We want a relationship with our grandmother." Grace clutched her sketchbook, her voice trembling but clear. "She's the only one who ever believed in who we could be, even without knowing us. We want her in our lives." Caroline's face drained of color. The judge tapped his gavel and spoke firmly. "The petition is denied. There is no evidence this woman poses harm. On the contrary, there is significant proof she has acted in good faith." The gavel struck again, and with it, 13 years of silence shattered. Ethan and Grace crossed the courtroom and came straight into my arms. For the first time since they were small children, I held them. Not in dreams, not in memory, in reality. Caroline sat frozen, her empire of control crumbling in plain sight. And I finally had my family back. A year has passed since that day in court. Life looks different now, quieter in some ways, fuller in others. Ethan has started a small company developing renewable energy prototypes, a dream he once thought impossible to pursue. Grace earned a scholarship at a prestigious university, her poems now published in the school's literary journal. When I see them thriving, I know the years I spent waiting were not wasted. They were the foundation of this moment. Matthew, my son, has begun to rebuild himself. He moved into the pool house on my estate, a symbolic reversal of Caroline's cruel offer to me. We share coffee in the mornings, awkward at times but honest. Healing between us is slow, fragile but real. For the first time, he admits the choices he made, not with excuses, but with regret. That, too, is progress. As for Caroline, she chose exile over accountability. She left town, chasing the remnants of a life built on appearances. I do not celebrate her downfall, but neither do I mourn it. Some people cannot be changed. They must live with the emptiness they create. I often sit in the library now, the same place I once planned every step of my fight. Ethan and Grace sit across from me, studying, laughing, filling the silence that haunted me for so long. The house, once echoing with loneliness, is alive again. If there is one lesson my story carries, it is this: revenge is not always about destroying someone else. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is building a life so full of love and truth that lies cannot survive beside it. If this story has touched you, share it, like this video, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and remember, you too can turn pain into power. Your story isn't over yet.